as spiritual teachers, we sort of are playing a role of surrogate moms and dads. And moms and dads and spiritual teachers, like all the chimes and winds and so forth, spiritual teachers and moms and dads, they're all playing just surrogates of God, if you think about it. I don't mean usurping the role or presence of God. I just mean we're playing the role of the creator, the comforter, all that God is. But our moms and dads are just in a losing battle. They're never going to be able to live up to that perfection that God is. So parents have to learn to kind of, and creators of anything, not just of children, creators of a new business, creators of a song. We have to learn to say, I'm the channel of. I'm not the source of. We're channels. And so we say God is the source. We are the resource, the channels of things. So it's kind of like once upon a time. There's a story, and I'll keep it brief. But there's a story of an individual who made a really big comeback years ago. His name's Carlos Santana. I'm not really into his music per se, but I really admire that he's one that learned to get in touch with spirit over the years, and he became a big fan of angelology, and all that. So long story short, one time this pop musician asks permission to record one of Carlos's songs. This is before Carlos, I think, really made his big comeback, or shortly thereafter. And this person says, I'd like to record one of Carlos's songs. And Carlos catches wind of it and says, absolutely not. He's like, this is just some pop punk. I'm like a legend. So no, I'm not going to let this guy, make a pop tune out of my music because I'm a diva without realizing it. And so Carlos is out playing tennis. And so this is kind of trippy, but he's out playing tennis. He throws the ball up to serve, and he says that he threw the ball up. He's practicing, I guess. So he throws the ball up to serve, and the ball disappears. So it's kind of interesting, right? The ball disappears, and so he's looking, and he says that he has a spiritual experience. And so in that spiritual experience, he actually sees God or hears the voice of God saying, you're going to let this person record your song. And, Carlos Santana is kind of responding with, I don't understand, it's my song. And then he hears the voice say, who do you think gave you the song? And so it's kind of interesting because we receive these moments of guidance, even our children, and then we try to take ownership of them. The ego just screws up everything. Let's put it that way, right? It just messes with everything. So, he throws the ball, disappears, and he has this dialogue. Who do you think gave you the song? And then he realizes, all right, you're right. I'll let him record the song. Then the ball comes back down. But, did the ball really disappear? What happened? Well, what happens is we go into these time warps. I call them miracle bubbles. So if somebody were watching from afar and saw you throw the ball up to serve, they may have only seen you throw a ball up and serve it. What happens is not always external phenomena that everybody can see from their vantage points. What often happens is, in our experience, because things are multidimensional, we can throw a ball up, and in that split second, we go into a time warp. Time doesn't warp around us. We warp within and have this altered experience. So all of this conversation could have been 1 second, could have been 5 hours, and in the timelessness of other dimensionalities, it's nothing. So externally, it might not have looked like anything unusual for that matter, although externally some things do go like that. They do happen. What people don't realize, it's often inside, and I know a lot of you have had your experiences. Even we all have dreams that seem like they last an hour, and they're actually only a couple of seconds. So that's an example of how time works when we're sort of in another dimensional consciousness. So I hope that makes sense. So that little analogy of Carlos Santana comes from the idea that even as creators of anything, we're really just the channels of that, and we have to be careful. But it becomes an interesting job for a mommy or a daddy. Like if I were to go back and do my life over, if I were to choose to come back to Earth and be a parent again, knowing what I know and knowing what you know, I think we might all be able to say we might do things differently. It would be very difficult for me to do that again and have children again, knowing what I know. Already knowing what I know this lifetime made it very challenging, because in the perfection of what I know spiritually, it was probably very difficult. I mean, my children described it being difficult, primarily difficult in that they felt like, Dad, you just knew so much. And I mean, this is quoting them, you knew so much it was hard to live up to your ideals and your visions of what could be. So for me, it was mind-boggling and mind-breaking to know what I know and yet sort of keep doing what I teach, which is respect the illusion. How much of the illusion, how much do you allow? If you know the truth and you see your children going through natural adolescent things, what do you do about that? You know, what do you do to explain that to them? Knowing about love and hate and fear and so forth. When my children would come from school and talk about some kid they hated or something, you know, they always got a little, a loving, passive lesson from me. I would tell them, well, gosh, you know, guys, you ought to think about that and so on. And, you know, and they would laugh and say that I reminded them of the character named Flanders on The Simpsons. He's the goody-good Christian next door to the Simpsons. They were more like the dysfunctional Simpsons, and I was like this goody-good, and we would laugh about it. I didn't really know who they were talking about for a while, but I eventually caught on and thought it was kind of funny. And I'm glad. I'd rather be the goody-good Christian next door than kind of all the dysfunctional types. So when we're parents, and again, this is parenting even in a business or a song you create, to know the truth of, I was there, I co-created that, there's a beauty to it. And if I'm a creator of a song, maybe there's certain artists I'd rather not tamper with it, you know, types of artists that maybe don't live good standards, and then they could give a different impression to people. You know, there's carrying all that that feeling of responsibility when we create something. We create a business. We want a good vibe there. I helped co-create what we have at Unity of Sedona, and you know, we create a certain integrity. And when people are acting very hurtful, we must never hate them. We must always send them love. But if they're acting really hurtful or just whatever, you know, hateful, there's people we had to say no to, and that pushed the buttons of some people. But those people they push the buttons of are the people that are the most screwed up. They're the people that don't have healthiness, don't have boundaries, so they don't want to see someone else set boundaries, because then it reminds them of their own chaotic life or consciousness. You know, but yet we're in a role that everybody's watching. It's kind of interesting, you know. And as a spiritual teacher that I am, and any of you that play this role or increase your role, even if you've only read one book recently, and now you're a little different in your family or a place of work, everybody's watching, wondering, what are you about? You know, are they going to see you cuss like the rest of them? And are they going to see you sleeping around and drinking around? And, you know, it's interesting. So, you know, people on the path will say, well, you just have to be yourself. Obviously, that's a really good lesson and a good piece of advice. But there's a part of me that says, but wait a minute. If we as spiritual leaders aren't different, if we're not acting different than just the common folks that are hurtful and addicted and all that, you know, I understand that, you know, to each his own. See, to an author on the spiritual path, the authors that just write about, they're not necessarily spiritual themselves, although they claim to be, and people think they are. They're really just authors. Well, all they care about is they write their books and they cash their checks, and then they live their life. They've got 15 houses and all that, and everything's just peachy, right? But I think to myself, my brain can't work that way. My brain is like, it's very interesting. I'm partly sharing this personally, but I'm also partly advising. It gets very precarious because to some people, Michael takes this too seriously, and I'm thinking, but if we don't, who's going to? If we're not going to think seriously about, we're supposed to be representing God to some degree. I'm not saying that we're supposed to be God, replace God, but I'm saying we're representing God. And to a degree, when you're moms and dads, you kind of have that role. So you try to be different. Try not to be the mom or the dad. Try not to be the typical dad that's sleeping around. Try not to be the typical mom that's drinking around. You know, can we be different? You know, it would be interesting when I remember my kids growing up, and they had friends, and the friends, you would hear about this one friend of theirs, and the parents were kind of sleeping around and not being faithful, or another parents, you know, a child's parents are stuck in addictions. You know, it was interesting because there was a part of me that wanted to help, but also the acceptance it wasn't my business, and I didn't even know the people, not even their names, let alone to step in and say anything. So it's interesting that we all juggle this. We all juggle the mom role, the dad role, the spiritual teacher role. Any role where you're playing a part to represent better. You can be just a school teacher. We all then are having that role. If you're a boss at work or a manager at work, a supervisor, I mean, what do you think that is? Just something clinical, something managerial? I mean, isn't it that once upon a time, when God was speaking to Israelites or speaking to the people of India through the Vedas, God originally told people that there was a way to be. He actually gave them lessons in how to be. Whether it's commandments or whether it was other forms, it was ways to be. The Vedas are all about how to be. Like how to be in medicine, Ayurveda, how to be in law, how to be in the social systems, economic systems. So God once spoke that to us, and then mankind has gotten so far from there, so messed up. It's kind of like there's no guidance anymore. So some people think I take it too seriously, and in some moments of my life I've wondered. But then I say to myself, as you should, we should all learn to ask ourselves questions, good questions. Would I do it differently? Could I see myself just setting down the scepter of being a spiritual leader, the staff of Moses, the heart of Christ, or any other symbolism? Could I just, and I really couldn't. This is what I am, this is who I am. When people have said many years ago, what do you like when you're not teaching? I think I've told you guys, but it's like what do you mean, what am I like when I'm not teaching? If my answer would be, and I had an answer, that would mean that there's a certain hypocrisy or misalignment. So I've taken on, I think, the toughest job that a person can take on, in a sense, not being a spiritual teacher. It's being a spiritual teacher who takes it seriously and tries to be what he teaches. And I do. I do my best to be what I teach, and what I've learned is in doing that, and the same I'm saying to you too. If you can say to yourself, I'm a mom, a mommy, or a daddy, how can I really represent God to the best of my ability in my family? Even if your children are older now, or if you don't have children, in what part of your life do you play the leader role? And then ask yourself, how do I do that without being preachy? How do I do that without taking it so serious that I'm just breaking my mind with pressure? And that's a fine line, man. That's a very fine line. If I were an actor, I would be the type of actor that says, wait a minute, instead of just cashola, I would be going, well, wait, I want to have roles that are significant and that are responsible. People are watching. I know I'm just an actor and I play different roles, but I want to be responsible. A guy like Will Smith, I don't know if he still applies this today, but once upon a time he said, I have kids, I want to be responsible, no cussing, no excessive violence. In the early years he was saying this, and I think that was amazing that a guy could stand up for his principles even in Hollywood. What if you're an artist, a musician, and you're getting all these big bucks to write songs, but they want you to write certain types? It almost doesn't fly in this world to be the guy who says, well, that's all fine and dandy, but I want to write songs that are true, that are meaningful, that are spiritual. God bless those who do pull that off and stick to their integrities. The band U2, they were popular years ago, and they're still together, but I've never owned an album of theirs or anything like that, but I liked a couple of their songs. What I learned about people, though, is U2 got together. They were actually considered a Christian rock band in the new wave days of the 80s. They were a Christian band, and they started making so much money and partying so much that a couple of the members said to the others, if we're going to continue this Christian stuff, we're out of here. And so they had to come up with a compromise. The other couple members said, all right, well, we'll back off on that a little bit. And so how much did they sacrifice in their personal lives? Can't say, don't know them. But we all come to that crossroads. So as a mom, as a dad, remember I said as a mom meeting a creator, even in your workplace, if you're a manager, how do you bring love, spirit, something wonderful to the place of work? You don't have to call it that. But are you living that? Are you really bringing it to that place, When I used to advise people who did conferences and things like that, when I go to churches and churches ask me to advise them, they just don't realize the trouble they're going to get into by asking my opinion. Because I told you guys before, I'm going to be like Well, where's the problem? Well, the minister's been accused of taking money, or the board members are sleeping with each other, or this person is trying to sue that person, or whatever. You can go back to the New Testament when they were designing how to run churches if you want to, but I don't have to go there. I already know this within myself. You just start kicking everybody out so that you can level the playing field and then rebuild from a place of a greater integrity. And as soon as you say something like that, they all start going, uh-oh, we asked the wrong person. Well, it's the same in the household. There's a certain line you have to draw, and there's certain at business. There's a thing, if you own a business, there used to be this thing people would remember: the customer is always right. If I owned a business, or if I came into your business and you hired me as a consultant, one of the first things I would put is a sign on your wall behind your desk that says the customer is not always right. If the customer is acting like an ass, if the customer is being hurtful, they're not right. Jesus says in the Course in Miracles, thank God I finally had somebody stand up for what I believe in this, but he says the ego is always wrong. How much clearer can you get? The ego is always wrong. So you can put your little sign up, man, the customer is not always right, and then breathe, because in other places, the employees have to take abuse because the customer is always right. If I owned a restaurant and somebody was being excessively rude and my waiter was doing the best job they could, or waitress the best job they could, and it was just one of those customers that just can't be okay, they just got to complain, and they say, well, I'll never come here again. I'll say, that's great, because we actually don't want you here again. Mind if we get a photo of you so we can put it up on our wall so we can tell our staff to not have you back? I mean, I would. In my playful, still love you kind of a way. But it's a way of saying, nobody will abuse my employees. It's just the way it is. And it's the same at Unity of Sedona or any other place for that matter. It's okay. And people just want to be so frighteningly, politically correct, frozen in, oh my God, I don't want them to not like me. Then you actually are setting yourself for self-destruction and external destruction. Stand for God, man. Stand for God, So as I'm kind of wrapping to a close, remember, wrapping it up, not wrapping to a close, so don't get me started. Some of you saw that recent rendition of a rap song, which was just being playful. In any case, think about this. Think about it, because I've had people say to me, and this has been coming out quite a bit over the last years, people would say, I saw Michael online, or I read a book, and then I went to a workshop, and there's all this pressure building. I'm going to go see him in Florida or whatever. And they, I'm just me. I just walk in, sit on a stool, start teaching, or stand there and teach. And there's people in the audience who are just like waiting, like, I heard of him. I heard of him. I'm waiting to see what he's like. And there's this whole dramatic thing. And I'm just like, hey, me, I'm just me. Yes, there's a deep, powerful, inspired person. And that's beautiful. It's not an act. But at the same time, I like just being very grounded about it. Like, here I am, and call things what they are, say what I want to say. But there's people in the audience waiting. And if I happen to say something just perfectly not what they wanted to hear, it's like they wipe their brow and go, thank God, he's made me not like him, or that he's made me like him less, or they come to workshops and they find some sort of flaw. This is typical in all of us. We find something we love, and it's the same. Your children are always watching you to screw up. See if you screw up. Your children are always watching. Mom just did something. What's Dad going to do about it? I know that we think that they're just these beautiful, blessed little angels. There's a creepy side to them called an ego, just like in you and me. Those beautiful little 3-year-olds, they're so sweet, and they finger paint, and it's all wonderful, and you stick it to your refrigerator. Those beings are sitting there watching, and they're scoping everything out. They're scheming. What's Dad do? What does Mom do? How do they react? So that because they absorb, in case you don't know this, children will absorb for the first several years of their life everything they're seeing. Before there was iPhones and all this other funky technology, recording everything you do, and having all your videos and live streaming and all this, children were already doing that, man. They were already recording it all. And you wonder, why did your child become so acting out or fussy at 7 or 14 or whatever? All they did was record everything for the first several years, and they're like sponges, those wonderful children. They're like sponges, and they just soak up all of your dysfunctions and malfunctions, and they're just like, And then you cried and you screamed, they soaked it up. They saw that you got your way when you screamed loud enough, they soaked it up. They saw that you got your way when you stomped your feet, and they soaked it. And they just sit there going, you know, in their minds, you just wait, Mom and Dad. They soak it up. Now here's what happens. They reach a certain age. Usually it's going to be in the adolescence. And the sponge, ever so full and beautifully swollen, and it just starts wringing out. Those blessed little children, they start wringing themselves out. And all that they soaked up starts to pour out in what we call tantrums, what we call drug addictions or bad grades or whatever. And all they're doing is feeding it back to us. And what I'm saying there is that being responsible, even if we're really wonderful, wonderful parents, they still have their own path. And even if you're a great store owner, a restaurant owner, the people have their own lessons and paths. So even when we do our best to be wonderful, life is life, and it's going to bring some lessons, you know, each person's lessons and the group's lessons. So as I said, for me and for anybody that plays a role in a responsibility to sort of, how can I bring the presence of God today? Every human being should be asking that every day. How can I bring the presence of God? Well, for me, as a spiritual leader, it's been quite interesting to see how people just watch, waiting for a flaw, waiting for me to hiccup, you know, and go, oh, there it is. There's the human side. And I'm sad for them, because that's kind of an obsessing that they're doing, because they're so afraid that if I'm really that good of a person, then they might have to live up to that, and they don't want to, so they watch for flaws. It's the ego, not God in them, that watches for that. It's the ego in the children that are watching to see something go wrong. But the God and the Christ presence in each of us is willing to say, wait a minute. And let me make this clear. Some people think that God is the part that says, let me just breathe. It's okay. I really admired that person, that spiritual teacher, whomever it is. But they're human too. What they're doing is saying they're just as messed up as the rest of us. And I don't want to be giving people an excuse to do that, because it actually is hurting their soul. Not just I don't want them to see or think naughty things about me. I feel so responsible on the path that I think to myself, this is going to hurt you if I give you some target to shoot at. If besides I'm teaching on Sunday and I slip away after services off to a bar, you know, knock a few down, that's giving people something to hate, and I don't want to give something for people to hate. You know, people hating me at all on the planet is kind of a drag, or hating you. Hate's always a drag. But when we give them a bit of fodder, you know, when we give them a bit of substance to grab onto, to bite into, and cause their hate or exacerbate their hate, I think to myself, well, how can we prevent that? So one way that I can prevent it, and you can prevent it, is, but when we're open, when we're kind of humble, and we can say to people that are troubled, or they don't like it, something about us, I'm willing to say, tell me what it is, because I might be able to help. I'm willing to make changes, even for a stranger, if it's within reason. The downside, of course, is that if you are willing to make changes for people, sometimes it causes them to have even more confused feelings, because why would you do that, you know, and it causes all kind of transference and all that. But think about this, you know, if you're a mom, if you're a dad, it's Mother's Day. If you're a father, you know, if you're a spiritual leader, not only what can I do to represent God within reason, if I slip, what can I do to bounce back? And if people call you on something, are you willing to make an adjustment around that thing? I've had, you know, I remember one or two times when my children, you know, asked questions or said something. There was one child, my one child said, you know, when they were young, I remember sometimes when they would do something, I did what we did in those days. I'd swat their butt, you know, and nothing major, but I would do that when they were real little. And one of them, God, said to me one day, Daddy, do your students know that you swat us? And I went, shit. You know, like, that, even though that's a fairly normal thing to do, give a little swat on the butt in those days was thought to be normal and acceptable. As soon as she said that, I thought, okay, right or wrong, it was enough of a statement for me to say, okay, and I never did it again. So even a child, I welcome even a child to say, hey, you know, what do you think about that? And make an adjustment. I think it's a beautiful thing that anybody can call you. Now, that doesn't mean I sit around and I'm saying, everybody send in your opinion so I can just cater to all of them. No, no, no. But I think it's beautiful to make adjustments where and when we can. I think that's a relevant thing to do in the 12-step programs. it's in the course, and so on and so on and so on. And yet there's also a part of us that we need not change, which is the Christ part, meaning if you're centered in Christ and people want you to be a different way, let's say you're centered in Christ and you're saying, it no longer feels right for me to hang around certain family members, and they complain. That's not where I would acquiesce at all. Because when I see something contrary to Christ, I'm not going to bend to them. When I'm not certain, or when something seems like it could be a minor improvement, why not? So just consider that. Your moms, but be flexible. Dads, be flexible. Parents, be flexible. Store owners, be flexible. And so on and so on. Stand up for what seems right. The customer is not always right. And yet be willing to make adjustments. Be willing to apologize and make amends where and when you can. I pray this has made good sense, because it's all in the theme of our roles, and what we can do to help others and stand up for a better lifestyle and a better example to people. Many blessings. Peace be with all of you. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.